Hey, hi everyone. Welcome to this month's session of GastroBites. This session is presented by the AGA's Trainee and Early Career Committee's Career Development Workshops. Just a reminder, these sessions are not only free for trainees and early career physicians, but also open to the public. And this session has been developed in collaboration with the AGA's Women's Committee. Today, we're so excited to have an amazing panel joining us to share their perspective and wisdom about the job search process and contract negotiation. We're going to discuss the important topic of job searches, covering considerations even before you begin the job search, academic versus private practice, offer letters, and negotiation strategies. Having just personally gone through the process, I can say I would have really benefited from this talk. So I'm so glad you're all joining us. Just as a reminder, this conversation will be recorded and preserved for future reference on the AGA University website. And for those who are participating in the live session, please do engage and ask your questions by utilizing the Q&A button below on the Zoom screen. So to just start off, we're just going to go around and introduce ourselves. Today, my name is Margaret Joe. I am going to be your moderator today. I'm currently an advanced endoscopy fellow at Stanford University with particular interests in Barrett's esophagus and pancreatic biliary disease. It's so nice to be here with you all. I'm just going to ask some of our panelists to go around and introduce themselves. So maybe Nicolette, you want to go ahead?
Hey everyone, it's a pleasure to have you all here today. My name is Nicolette Rodriguez. I am an academic gastroenterologist at Brigham and Women's Hospital and Dana-Farber. My interests are in early cancer detection and increasing access to cancer preventative care in marginalized populations.
Thank you, Nicolette. Maybe John, can you introduce yourself next?
Sure, thank you very much. Appreciate being here. I'm John Allen. I had a 30-year career in private practice at Minnesota Gastroenterology. I then went to Yale and then Michigan, retired from Michigan about a year and a half ago. So I've been intimately involved in negotiation, both in private practice and for faculty positions as the interviewer. And I was president of AGA in 2014 and 15. So pleasure to be here.
Thank you for being here. And Megan.
Hi, I thank you very much for having me today. My name is Megan Adams. I am an assistant professor at the University of Michigan, and I practice general gastroenterology at the Ann Arbor VA, and I also do health services research at the University of Michigan. Of note, prior to becoming a physician, I actually am trained as an attorney, so I have some special insights into contracts and negotiation. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for being here today. I think we're just going to kick off the session with an overview from Dr. John Allen. So he's going to start sharing his screen to give us a foundation for some key things to consider.
Is that all up?
Yes, we can see your screen. Thank you.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. So I'm going to focus on private practice and negotiation of private practice contracts. Think of this in 5 phases, maybe not 5 interviews, but 5 phases. The first and very important part is your preparation and research. The second is your first contract and interview, which is really a getting acquainted session. And this is usually face-to-face, sometimes virtual. The second contract, you really go into practice details. Third contact, you get into the final details, your contract review, and anything that you have in terms of special requests. Sorry about that. Trying to get this out of the way. And then finally, very important, is your personal legal review with an attorney, and something that many people fail to do, begin your financial education and planning. So let's take these in order. So first of all, the preparation and research. You've established a place you want to live. Think about the cost of living. What are the state taxes, property taxes, medium home cost, and insurance? If travel is important to you, the ease of travel, the state infrastructure, particularly schools for your kids, and other quality of life issues. Then start researching out some of the health systems that are involved in the practice that you've targeted. And if you can't get that from online resources, begin to ask these questions when you interview. What are the big health systems? Are there dominant health systems? Are they open or closed? Closed meaning they have their own employed gastroenterologist. Open, they partner with private practice. And what's the relationship between that practice and those big health systems? And finally, the payer mix. Is this a place that did Medicaid expansion? Does the practice take Medicaid? Does it take Medicare? Is the Blue Cross Blue Shield the dominant factor like it was in Michigan? Begin to ask those questions because you want to understand what the pressures on the system, the practice are. In your first part, the getting acquainted part, you want to have a resume. You've already sent in your CV, but you want to have a brief bio and contact information that you can hand to every single interviewer, just as an introduction and for them to have something to remember you by. Think about your story and practice it. What are your special talents? What are your training? What would you like in a practice? Do you want a practice that really focuses on, everybody says they focus on patients, but ask them questions about how they focus on patients. Do they really focus on a complete RVU compensation system and are focused on high income? Are they focused on providing good care for diverse populations? Those are the kind of questions that you can begin to ask. Really important is, what is the practice governance? About 40% of private practices are now owned by private equity partners. So that's an important consideration. Is it owned by a health system? Optum is the largest physician employer in the country right now. That's a subsidiary of United Health Group. You start talking about clinical research, lots of people come in and said, I'd be interested in clinical research. You really have to know what you're talking about. Most practices don't particularly care about that, so that's not an important selling point. But if you are interested in that, research out about whether that practice has a clinical research arm. Answer your questions in the positive. Avoid I don't want tos. It presents a much better picture of yourself. This next thing is really important. Have some sticky phrases. When you're interviewing, there are going to be times, excuse me, when somebody says something that really hits an emotional trigger for you, you don't want to be caught like a deer in headlights. Have some phrases like, somebody asks a question that's really either offensive or triggers something in you. Stop and count to 5. Just let that silence reign. And then say, I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear you. Could you repeat that? Something to alert them that this is something that means something important to you. And it also takes your power back. Always follow up with personal thank yous and emails, not only to the physician you're talking to, but the administrators, the nurses, the people that you meet. In your second contact, where is it that you'll practice? Is it a single place or do you float to different clinics or surgery centers? Obviously, hospital coverage, call, clinical mix. You can begin to get into the compensation and benefit formulas and ask the question, is that the same for everyone? Is this a senior weighted benefit practice, or is this something that's more equitable for everyone? Do they have different employment and partnership models? Some practices have per diems, part-time, full-time partnership models. How long does it take to buy into the practice? You may not want to ask the politically sensitive question of, can I get 12 weeks of maternity leave? But you can frame that question by saying, how do you accommodate partners that have an extended absence? Early in my career, I was out for 6 months undergoing chemotherapy. Another partner fell down and broke both of his wrists. There are lots of reasons why people take extended absences. Megan will get into the non-compete in just a moment. But that's also very important. And then try to meet with other partners and perhaps their lead administrator or nursing staff. The third contact is where you review the contract, establish the final details, but don't sign. Be sure that everything you need and discussed is written. Excuse me. What are the expected salaries? What are your benefits and compensation package? And what is the track to partnership? Get into things like vacation, sick leave, paid time off, FMLA. Finally, legal review. Get a health employment attorney, preferably in the state where you practice, and have them review the contract. Then begin your financial education and plan, and this is key. Begin to investigate people that do wealth management, not just investment advice, but wealth management that has a fiduciary responsibility to you. You have a late start, you probably have student loans, you're going from a fellowship salary to a very high marginal tax rate, malpractice, personal liability, all of these things need to be incorporated into a financial plan. Set your retirement asset goal right now. You're in your 30s, you're going to retire sometime between 65 and 75. Figure out your threshold for your asset goal. Right now, that sits somewhere between, again, depending on your spending habits, somewhere between $5 and $8 million. So you want a long-term plan that can help you get there, planned with a professional. And think about setting aside money now. If you set aside $100 a month in an account that earns about 6% interest, which is typical for an index fund that tracks the S&P, in 30 years, you're going to end up with $100,000 in that fund. If you wait for 15 years, that reduces to $30,000. So understand the concept of compounding interest. Here's my contact information. I'm happy to speak or email personally with you. I've reviewed lots of contracts. Here's my email and cell. I'm going to stop sharing now and turn it over to Megan.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to talk just briefly about the academic job search, and really for purposes of my slides, we assume that you have already just made the decision about whether you want to stay in an academic environment or go out into private practice, and so my slides will be focused in that way. So I'm going to start just with some pre-academic job search considerations. Even after you've decided that you want to stay in academics, it's really important to be honest with yourself about what you want in an academic career and what kind of culture you're looking for. Even in an academic environment, there are a lot of different types of positions. There are those, purely clinical positions, others that are sort of tenure track and research focused. And then hybrid positions, with administrative focus, et cetera. So really understanding kind of what you want before you go into the job search is important. You also want to understand the differences between the job search and the match. Really up to this point, right? You went through a match to get into residency and a match to get into the fellowship, but the job search is a little bit different. The dynamics are different, and really you want to understand kind of your value and your worth, and understand that the job search process is really kind of a way to assess the mutual fit between the job searcher and the future program. So just understanding that the change in dynamics is important. Also think about what criteria are most important to you, and if you can kind of prioritize them in some way, that's really important. Your top priority may be to move closer to family. Maybe you did your fellowship in Ohio and you want to go back to California, right? That's going to limit your job search and its scope. Maybe you have a really specific research niche, and your sort of top priority is an appropriate mentor to complement that niche, and being able to get K funding and make it to independence, right? So all of that is going to influence the types of programs that you are applying to and potentially narrow your search. Oops. How do you choose programs? So, networking during fellowship is really important. You want to both talk to early career faculty at your institution and other institutions, as well as your mentors about what programs might be a good fit, sort of taking into consideration your priorities and what kind of culture that you want. Often your mentors and fellowship can make email introductions to division chiefs at other institutions that can really help open doors. Ideally, these discussions should start during your second year of fellowship, and this is because it's really important to get on programs' radars. Sometimes programs will not know what types of positions that they'll have available, but if they know that you're interested, then you're going to be sort of on the top of the list when they do have that clarity. It's also important to understand programs' needs, whether they are looking for IBD providers, or they're interested more in kind of clinical track faculty than tenure track faculty. Maybe they want a motility specialist. So understanding programs' needs both before you apply and then learning more as you go through the interview process is important. So what about academic interviewing? What does that look like? Well, the process usually starts with a phone or a Zoom call with the division chief, and the purpose of this really is to it's sort of a get to know you call. If there is continued mutual interest, the programs will arrange for a first look on-site interview. These days the typical interview day for a first visit is typically a longer day. Typically you're going to meet with lots of different faculty members, usually between 8 and 10 interviews, so which are really kind of conversational, really getting to know the culture of the program, assessing mutual fit. If you are you're looking for a tenure track position, there will typically be a chalk talk or kind of a research talk presenting your research and kind of where you see yourself going in the future. And then it typically will end with some sort of a dinner, and it is a long day, so you should just be prepared for that. It's important to really not be afraid to ask the tough questions during this initial interview day. For instance, if you are interested in a tenure track position, right, you absolutely should ask about the success rate of junior faculty in getting grants and things like the equity culture at the institution. I think these are really important for you to just be able to understand the program and what you're getting into. It is not really the time for serious negotiation in terms of salary, et cetera, but it's important to let programs know what's important to you for your career success and what your interests are. So for instance, maybe you're really interested in the future in becoming a program director, and what would the opportunities look like at that institution? Would there be support for that? If you are more of a tenure track faculty member, what are the options for protected time for research at that institution? And what are the expectations for timeline in terms of getting that first grant funding? So these are important things to discuss. You may or may not walk out with a verbal offer subject to further negotiation. You definitely should not be concerned if you don't walk out with an offer. That may come later. If an offer is extended, they may offer a second visit, the purpose of which is really to continue negotiations and then also do things like go on a house or a schools tour, bring your family, that sort of thing. Programs typically will cover your travel expenses, though the timeline for reimbursement, it may take a little while to get reimbursed. So just keep that in mind. In terms of negotiation, if academic contracts, it's important to understand it's not typically just a single conversation. It's typically numerous conversations over time until you kind of get to a verbal agreement. But it is important once you reach a verbal agreement to follow up that conversation with an email documenting the terms that you have discussed. And that's really just because Over time, memories can fade or you could have a different understanding about what was agreed to than the institution, and you want to know that up front. Again, think about what's important to your career success and explain how that aligns with the needs of the institution. I think this is really critical when you're negotiating. Also, just as critical is understanding what's negotiable and what's not, and we'll talk about this more today. I would say typically at academic institutions, salary, or at least starting salary, is probably a little bit less negotiable than elsewhere, but there may be some wiggle room, particularly if you're external. But what things that are more negotiable tend to be things like protected time for research and other activities and the duration of that support. Sometimes things like loan repayment, coverage of additional training, like a master's program, et cetera. Once you have an offer letter in hand, which is basically a written, offer letter, you want to read it carefully and have a trusted mentor read it. Often there are things that you talked about verbally that don't necessarily make it into the offer letter due to an oversight. So if you see something there that's really materially, or you don't see something in your letter that's materially important to you, you want to, it's perfectly fine to ask for written documentation of that agreement. And negotiations can continue even after you receive the offer letter, because of course you need to read it and digest it further before signing it. Don't hesitate to ask for more time either. Sometimes institutions will send you the offer letter and they will say, we want you to make a decision on this or sign it within 3 days or a week. But understand that you can and absolutely should email back and ask for more time if you need it. The interview timelines don't always line up exactly. And so, you don't want to email a program and ask for more time on the very last day that you can. It's better to do that upfront. But it is perfectly acceptable. And most, 9 times out of 10, you will be given some more time. Okay, so what are the typical elements of an academic offer letter? First of all, the offer letter will lay out details in terms of your compensation or salary and how your time will be allocated. In terms of compensation, there are sort of fixed compensation models. You will make $300,000 a year. Sometimes you'll have a certain amount of guaranteed income, and then some that is productivity based, but all of this should be spelled out in the contract, as well as any kind of what you need to do to achieve any kind of bonus compensation. One thing that's important to note, particularly for public institutions, is that sometimes institutions, including my own, will publish data publicly of salaries. However, it's important to know that that is not necessarily reflective of the actual salaries, because what they will list is essentially a base salary, right? It doesn't include the supplemental salary and administrative differentials and all of these other sources of income. So the best way to understand kind of what is the typical starting salary at a program is to ask people who've been through the process in the last few years, whether it's early career faculty at that institution or, colleagues of yours who have applied to that institution in recent years. Protected time is an important thing to negotiate. And this should be, contained in your contract. This could be protected time for research, protected time for administrative activities. Usually, even clinical positions, they will have a half day of administrative time included. But again, this should be in your contract. For research or tenure track positions, it's important not only the percentage of protected time, but for how many years it is provided. So, is it 40% protected time for 1 year, or is it 40% protected for 3 years? There's a big difference there. So make sure that you're aware of both components there. The offer letter will also lay out any benefits such as disability insurance, coverage of licensing fees, things like CME and vacation time. Also important to understand and negotiate are things like discretionary funds. So typically faculty members will be given, some funds that are used for, for clinical faculty to fund going to conferences and things like that, and conference travel. For research faculty, it's usually a larger sum of money, and that's to do things like building a lab for a basic scientist, or covering analyst time for a clinical researcher. And usually it's per year of protected time, you'll get an amount of money, discretionary funds per year. Let's see. So the contract or your offer letter will also lay out, whether you'll have an office or lab space. It's important for these offer letters also to specify your practice location. And that can be, either a specific satellite clinic, that you want to practice at, or for instance, when I was negotiating my contract at the University of Michigan, I really wanted to work at the VA and have that be my primary practice site. And so that was something I specifically discussed in my negotiation and made sure that that was documented in my letter. It will also set forth your teaching responsibilities and hiring incentives. So hiring incentives, I think, are another important thing to understand that are negotiable. So some of these hiring incentives will not really be extended unless you specifically ask. When I talk about hiring incentives, I mean things like some institutions will offer student loan reimbursement. Some will offer tuition reimbursement if you, for instance, want a master's degree, or you want to enroll in a master's degree program to build your, research skills, et cetera. Things like discretionary funds, moving expenses, and then some programs offer sign-on bonuses. Again, often not extended unless you specifically ask for them, and particularly if you're an internal candidate. Termination policies should also be set forth in your offer letter. And then lastly, we will talk about some special provisions, specifically non-compete clauses, which John mentioned earlier. So non-compete clauses are also known as restrictive covenants. These are really important to understand in any contract because they can impact your future mobility if and when you want to change jobs in the future. They typically stipulate kind of what physicians are not permitted to do when they leave an organization or an institution. In broad strokes, they are designed to protect the employer's reasonable competitive business interest. The idea being, if you are a faculty member at an institution for a number of years, you've developed specialized knowledge, goodwill, and a patient base, that if you all of a sudden leave and you go to a competitor across town, you're going to take all of that with you and potentially cause harm to the institution. So the details of these non-compete clauses are really critical. There's usually a time component, meaning you can't work at another employer down the street for 12 months from the end of your employment. And then also a geographic or distance component, setting forth the the number of miles that restriction deals with. So 50 miles from your principal practice location, potentially. And then it also will set forth the type of employment covered, meaning you can't work as a gastroenterologist versus, an internist, things like that. There are times when these clauses are found to be overly broad by the courts, but this can take a long time to litigate. And, overall, they just have to be quote unquote reasonable, which is interpreted in different ways for different specialties and different geographic locations. They are sometimes negotiable, so it's worth bringing up if you're concerned about that. But you have to bring it up, before you sign, because that's, when you have the most sort of negotiating power. Even if they are not enforced, they certainly can restrict future employment options, and mostly you don't want to be the test case in determining whether they're enforceable or not. So I'm going to stop there so we can get into some discussion, but just like Dr. Allen, I'm certainly open to speaking with those who have additional questions after the session. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for sharing these insights. it's been really, really helpful, even for myself to kind of hear these considerations. So thank you for sharing all the wisdom. I think I'm looking at the Q&A, we don't have any questions, but I certainly have had some come up for myself through the talk. So, I think kind of starting from the beginning of the process, Megan, you mentioned, for academic positions, a lot of us train in academic centers and utilizing our network to look for opportunities. I wanted to direct a question to John about for private practice or foundation opportunities, what are ways you might recommend, interested fellows to find out even about job opportunities, in places that might be a little bit harder for us to access in fellowship training?
It depends on the practice. If take Minnesota Gastroenterology, where I was practicing, they have a very sophisticated HR department, and contacting them and asking. Obviously, there are advertisements that you can look at. Some of the big private equity practices, they also have very sophisticated HR departments. Don't hesitate to contact them and simply ask and inquire. You're in a buyer's market. There are not enough gastroenterologists. There are not enough fellows coming out. So almost every practice, and I'm sure academic institutions are looking for people. So contact them. Don't hesitate.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's great advice. And I think for myself, I actually did use the AGA kind of career bulletin board just to explore what was out there in the region I was looking for. And I found that to be a really wonderful resource. Thank you. And
so
I think,
couple of, just to mention too, a couple of websites. Nerdwallet.com is fabulous for almost any financial metric that you can think of. And salary.com will give median salaries in all different regions of the country for gastroenterologists. So, and Medscape, those are the three big ones that you can use.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We do have a question from one of our audience members. So they're asking, is it common to find jobs that are willing to pay stipends to fellows during training? Has anyone experienced anything related to that?
I've never heard of that, either in private practice or academics.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that either. I have heard of it in other specialties, but I have not, I don't know of a situation where that's the case in GI.
Actually, I take that back. There are occasional times when they might help fund a fourth-year fellowship track in specialty, whether it's IBD or something like that, if they have a strategic need, but that's going to be pretty rare. You won't find that in private practice.
That's great to know. That's something I had never thought of either, so that's interesting for sure. I think we have another question. Let's see, for academic institutions, if you don't have any mentor connections to an institution, is it okay to reach out to the division chief directly to express your interest? I think we'd all probably agree. Absolutely, doesn't hurt.
Yeah, no, it's definitely important to reach out to the division chief directly. I think, part of the process when you're interviewing is to try to, help match you with, faculty members right at that institution kind of based on your interests. And so that is something that, and it is something actually that is important, especially if you're looking at a tenure track position, to have those mentors spelled out, even in your offer letter often, because you want that level of commitment, particularly if you're changing institutions. You want to know that you have people who will take you on right as a mentee and really help guide those early years. It's critical. So,
Nicolette, what's your experience?
So I went through this process about 2.5 years ago. And I know that even for institutions where I didn't necessarily have a direct mentor, I went ahead and emailed the chiefs personally, had a email kind of explaining who I was, where I came from, what my specific interest and niche was, just so they could kind of potentially pinpoint me in the right directions in their head and triage who my potential like mentorship team would be, and had my CV immediately attached to the email so that everything was kind of in a one-stop shop, expressing my interest in like potentially interviewing at their institution. And I would say I got responses from 80% of the chiefs that I actually emailed, and fairly quickly. I would say like within about a week, 80% of the chiefs emailed me, and I would say the other like 20% I didn't hear from. So I think most of the time folks were very willing to respond on that initial cold email.
Yeah, I feel like that was my experience as well. So I definitely encourage that. There are a couple other questions for Dr. Allen in particular. So one audience member is asking, what do employers, and I think this is probably more related to private practice, look for in a CV is number of scopes and ADR consideration, and what parts of I think a private practice contract are more negotiable?
I don't think they look at quality parameters. If you're coming from a reputable institution, they pretty much assume good training. That's not a great assumption, by the way, but I don't think they're going to look at that kind of quality detail in people. They're really looking at you as a person and what you want. And this is really a long-term relationship. It's not like, negotiating for a job. The difference between a contract in private practice and a letter of agreement in academics is really big. There's very little that you're going to negotiate with a big, well-established private practice. They really have to have everybody equal. All the partners are very aware of any of the compensation formulas, things like that. So if there are disparities or special deals, that's just not going to fly in a partnership. So what they offer is pretty much standard. And again, there's not a lot that's negotiable for a really well-established practice.
Yeah.
One thing I just wanted to add to John's comments there, I do think though, even though, practices, whether it's a, private practice or academics, may not, want information about your ADR, things like that, as part of the application process, they actually absolutely will reach out to colleagues that they know, right, at your institution and ask about you, right? And are you a solid fellow? Are you a team player? All of those things. So, that definitely does happen. And I think it's important to know that.
Absolutely. Thank you. We have another question. So this is specifically about hybrid practices that are both private and academic that offer a base salary without RVU incentives. Is it possible to negotiate, I think in your offer letter, the number of patients you're expected to see? This audience member is worried about not being protected from being expected to see more patients. Is this something you might have seen in contracts you've reviewed, Megan or John? Or
Probably not, and I wouldn't get into that. If you go into private practice, you are going to work incredibly hard. The pressure to generate revenue and patients is tremendous because, a private practice, their yearly earnings are distributed among partners. So you want to maximize that. They usually, they can offer a 4-day work week, or they can offer a lot of vacation or things like that. But pretty much the number of patients you see during the day is set. You do want to ask about the infrastructure. Do you have people that help you? And in private practice, you usually do. It's not like, what you have to do in academic medicine where you're documenting at, 10 o'clock at night. That's pretty rare in practice. They provide a lot more support. So asking about support for seeing patients, is it reasonable? That might be a way to approach that.
And in academic contracts, usually we'll spell out kind of how many half days of clinic, for instance, you are responsible for, right? Those types of things, which limits things somewhat. But, I think it's tough to get into, you know, that level of detail, because obviously the needs change or at the institution over time. And so, you know, some of it is difficult to predict. So.
Totally. Yeah. And
A
then
couple of other questions. Megan, talk about fellows that have a partner that are also completing a fellowship and how an academic institution might handle that.
So I think that typically what happens, similar to, for instance, fellows who are matching right at the same time as a fellow, residents who are matching at the same time as a partner, is that the divisions, you know, for say it's GI and cardiology, will typically talk to one another about you know, what the two candidates, right, and the level of interest in both of those candidates, and what positions are available. And so, you know, that typically will be happening behind the scenes, you know, when they get your CV, et cetera. But in terms of, I don't know, you know, in terms of negotiation, you know, again, I've not been involved in kind of that process, so I don't know if I could speak more to it than that. So.
There's a lot. Yes, I have been, and there's a lot. You go to great, if you want a fellow, you go to great lengths to accommodate partners. You should expect that, assuming they want you. There's another question about RVU bonuses and specific RVU targets. Do you guys want to talk about RVU targets that you're facing? I can talk about in private practice. You know, it's big. It's, you know, 6,000 to 10,000 work RVUs per year is pretty typical for a high functioning practice.
yeah, I'm not familiar really with the targets that I'm looking into yet. Or
faculty, you know, who are 60, 70% clinical, you're usually talking about 4,000, 4,500 for IBD faculty, a little bit more for interventional faculty. We actually wrote an article, it's published in Gastro probably 5 years ago, that lists at that time typical RVU targets. That was a survey among division chiefs. So you might look that up. I'm one of the authors.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I was going to say, I think it's also just helpful if you're interested in a program to ask, or a practice, to ask the potential colleagues you will have what their experiences are with reaching that RVU target. So if you're interested in a predominantly clinical position, for example, in an academic institution or a research position, asking people who potentially have a similar breakdown what their experiences are, so that you can gauge what you might have to kind of tackle or reach and what your experiences might be, because that might give you a little better understanding of what you might have to do if you decide to sign a contract there.
absolutely. And I think we're about to wrap up, but I did really just want to take a minute, and, you know, I think everything that you all have shared has been so important for, you know, all applicants to keep in mind when going through this search. Nicolette and Megan in particular, are there things that you feel like women applicants should really keep in mind as they're going through the job search and, you know, handling their negotiations?
I think one thing that was really helpful for me personally was I went through this job search with a male colleague of mine, and we actually compared, we happened to be in the same geographic vicinity, and we compared every single contract that we had from the same institutions to make sure that our numbers were the same. And when we say the numbers were the same, we're talking about, for a clinical session, are we being equitably paid for the same? We had differences in how our research was being broken down, but at the end of the day, are we being offered the same type of, for example, sign-on bonuses? We're being offered the same type of like moving costs, for example? Were we being offered the same type of base salary? And I think that was helpful, just so that I kind of had a little bit of a baseline of things that I could potentially expect. And then I was also asking colleagues of mine who were in similar fields that I was in. So for example, I'm a clinical investigator. I was looking for a specific research breakdown, and I also had a DEI role. And that's like a very specific type of niche. And so I reached out to a few folks in those areas, trying to kind of see what potential compensation I was trying to look for, and I was really trying to compare the offers that I was being given versus their offers. And that was really helpful for me going through that process because I felt like that was a really big black box for me. And trying to kind of gain insight from other folks who already had gone through the process was really very helpful.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to that. I think that's a really great approach. I love that approach of trying to, pairing with someone who's applying at the same time and to kind of really in real time understand, whether you're being presented with different terms. But yeah, I think it all comes down to doing your homework, and that's why the process, even before you get to the interview, is so important in terms of understanding the landscape and, not what's negotiable, what's not, what a typical package looks like at that institution for an incoming faculty member. And so if you're armed with that information from the get-go, you kind of understand whether how you're being treated is equitable or not. So that's the best advice that I can give on that subject.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I think we're, about out of time. I just want to say thank you all to our audience members and to our wonderful panelists for this awesome discussion. I think to sum up some of the important points we discussed today, as all of you are beginning your job search, we all hope you take some time to really consider the things that are important to you, both in your professional and your personal lives, so that you can explore the right jobs for you. And we hope you really remember that you bring a lot to the table in these discussions, and we hope you're taking away some negotiation strategies moving forward. I think all of our panelists here are happy to serve as a resource for you as you move forward. And just as a reminder from the AGA, just to remind, there's an AGA Women in GI Regional Workshop that's coming up. The AGA recognizes that balancing life as a physician is certainly challenging for all of us, especially for women, and we are committed to addressing these challenges directly. If you're interested in signing up for this workshop, the link is available at gastro.org. And if you want to dive deeper into this topic of jobs and negotiations, season 3 of the Small Talk Big Topics podcast series features an episode featuring Dr. John Allen and Dawn Sears discussing negotiations. And as a reminder, this session today has been recorded and will be archived on the EGA University website. Thanks so much for attending today's session, and we hope you all have a wonderful day. Bye, thank you.